This is the point where some students say, "But Dr. Sitnick, I hate Punnett squares. Can I just use math?" The answer is yes, you can, unless I explicitly ask you to use a square. What do I mean by that? Essentially, all that we've been doing is thinking about probability. And probability relies on a few different rules. If you understand the probability of something and the rules, you can solve problems like these without using a Punnett square. The first rule is the rule of multiplication. This calculates the probability of two independent events both happening. So if we think, for example, about the idea of flipping a coin, we have an individual who is going to be flipping a coin, and that coin's a dime, and another individual who's flipping a coin. That coin is a penny. Now the coins each have two outcomes. They can either be heads or tails. This is the same as being heterozygote. You either have the big B, heads, or the little b, tails. No big deal. That means that there's a 50-50 shot that you will flip heads or tails, regardless of the coin that you use. If we populate a Punnett square with this, we get the same outcome we would expect before. Two heads, a heads and a tail, and two tails. The likelihood of getting any of these events is the likelihood of each individual event multiplied by the other. So there's a half chance of getting heads on the penny and a half chance of getting heads on the dime. If both things happen, we multiply 1/2 by 1/2, which gives us a quarter. So each of these events has an equal likelihood, and they're each a quarter. Now we add the second rule, the rule of addition, which calculates the probability of events that can occur in multiple ways. So for example, there are two ways to get a head and a tail. You could either get a head on the dime and a tail on the penny, or a tail on the dime and a head on the penny. Those are two different ways to get the same thing, and so we can add them together. That gives us 2/4. This means that there is a 1/4 chance of getting two heads, a 2/4 chance of getting a head and a tail, and a 1/4 chance of getting two tails. This is the same 1:2:1 ratio that we see in a standard monohybrid cross. Now that we understand this idea of the rule of multiplication and rule of addition, we can expand this to as many genes as we want without having to make a Punnett square. So let's think about an example. If I gave you a plant whose genotype was big A, big B, big C, and I crossed that plant with a plant that was big A, big B, big C, what is the probability of an offspring having the genotype big A, big B, big C, big C? The easiest way to solve this problem is to treat it like three monohybrid crosses. Why don't you give it a try? Alright, so where's the best place to begin? The first thing that you want to do is you want to rewrite the cross. So if we do that, we can see very clearly what we're doing. Big A, big B, big C, cross to big A, big B, big C, little c. We can separate this into the three monohybrid crosses. That makes it a little easier for us to look at. And they look like this. And we want to know what is the likelihood that out of these crosses we get this result. Capital letters for everything. To calculate this, we can think about what is the likelihood that each parent will give that letter. So for example, if we're looking at the first cross, the individual on the left can only give big A's. That's all they have. So the likelihood of giving a big A is 100%, or 1. The likelihood of the person on the right giving a big A is 1/2. So the likelihood of getting big A is 1 times 1/2. We can think about this for the subsequent crosses as well. The likelihood of getting a big B from either parent is 1/2, and the likelihood of getting a big C is also going to be 1 times 1/2. That gives us a 1/2 chance of big A, a 1/4 chance of big B, a 1/2 chance of big C, big C. And when we multiply all of these events together, because they're independent events, we get that the likelihood of getting big letters for everything is going to be 1/16.